business is to appoint temporary members, Mr. Weinberg and Mr. Richards, to the Finance Committee for this meeting. And then Superintendent or Mr. Dunn, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Tonight we have two agenda items in front of you. They're just reversed. We'll start off first with the audit report for the FY22 budget that completed June 30th. And tonight we have representatives from Melanson, who have been our longtime auditors for the district. And then second will be Ellen Desmond to talk about the grants and where things are headed as we head into the budget for the next couple of months. So I will turn it over to Scott McIntyre, and he can begin introductions and everything.
Good evening, and thank you, Jack. Members of the committee, as Jack said, my name is Scott McIntyre. I'm one of the partners at Melanson, and with me tonight is Megan Whiff, one of our staff members. I guess I sort of jokingly said to the superintendent a few minutes ago, asked her to come tonight because she did all of the work, or most of the work. The manager on the job, Lori Garland, was not able to be here tonight, but anyway, we're happy to be here this afternoon and going to give you a brief overview. We're not going to walk through the entire set of your financial statements. We're going to walk through what we consider to be the highlights for the fiscal year 22. But before we get into the actual financial statements themselves, in our opinion, which is what you hire us to provide for you, I think it's important to just sort of set the table a little bit. And there's actually some auditing standards require us to do some communication with you at a meeting like this. There's really three main subject areas that are required communications under the current set of auditing standards. The first is what I kind of like to refer to as just how the audit went. And in our opinion, the audit went very well. The report was signed off on essentially the second day of January, almost within a 6-month window from year end. I consider it to be a very timely audit report, but probably more important than that, when we came in here to audit the books and records of the district, we found the books and records to be in good working order. And what that means is key accounts were reconciled on a regular and timely basis. And as a result of that, our firm did not need to propose any adjusting journal entries in order for your financial statements to be presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles here in the United States. So that's kudos to the district. One of the three required communications deals with the application of generally accepted accounting principles, and specifically whether or not there were any disagreements or issues that arose with the application of those accounting principles between the district and our firm. And again, pleased to be able to report that there were no disagreements in how to apply generally accepted accounting principles. And the last of the three required communications about your financial statements really deals with the estimates that are in here. And there are a handful in here. The largest ones are your net pension and your net OPEB liabilities and the related accounts. I can talk, and when we get into some of the numbers, I'll point those out. But as far as them being estimates, I think it's important for all members to recall that these estimates are provided by actuaries, the actuary for the New Hampshire retirement system, and your own actuary for your OPEB plan. So actuaries have their own set of standards, just like auditors do. So they apply a lot of test work to these account balances, but nonetheless, they are significant estimates in here. But we've gone through all the assumptions as part of our audit work, and we agree with the assumptions and the estimating techniques that the actuaries use to estimate these liabilities in the related accounts. And again, if we get into it, you want me to explain what I mean by related accounts, I'm happy to do that. There are a couple of other estimates in here, the largest of which would be the estimated useful life of your capital assets and how quickly they might depreciate. But your estimates are in accordance with guidelines, and there's nothing out of line with the estimated useful lives that you're using in your financial statements. With that quick overview, in your financial statements, if I could ask you to turn to page 1 of the document. It's not numbered. It's headed up with our logo Melanson in the top right-hand corner, and the independent auditor's report. This is, as I mentioned earlier, this is what you pay us for. Everything else in here belongs to the school district, and this is our opinion on your financial statements. I do want to point out, in case there are anyone who, is going to compare this report to the prior independent audit report, and that is it's going to look very different. Key part is there is going to look different. It doesn't really say anything different. It's a result of auditing standards evolving. Basically, if you look at the top of this report, it starts with our opinion. Last year, it started with all the standards that we followed and ended with our opinion. For lack of a better way of saying it, they flipped things around this year. So it looks different, but it says basically the same, and that is, in our opinion, after applying our auditing procedures in accordance with 1, generally accepted auditing standards, and 2, generally accepted government auditing standards, in our opinion, your financial statements are materially fairly presented in accordance with GAAP or generally accepted accounting principles. Sometimes referred to as a clean opinion. Technically, it's called an unmodified opinion. It's without modifications to our opinion. Your financial statements are in accordance with GAAP. Following that is your management's discussion and analysis on pages 5 through 11. I may come back to that at a later point in time. I'm going to turn all the way over to page 12. As we're turning to that page, the management's discussion and analysis is a great resource to go back to at a later point in time. Some of the things that we'll talk about tonight are specifically written up in your management's discussion and analysis. So it's a good reference point to go back to refresh your memory as to why some key account balances may have changed from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22. Now, starting on page 12, and maybe before I get into this, maybe just a reminder, if there are new committee members who haven't been through a set of your GAAP financial statements in a while, there are actually 2 sets of financial statements in this document, both a long-term perspective and a short-term perspective. What we're looking at on page 12, and it goes on to page 13, but I'm only going to speak about page 12, are your long-term perspective financial statements. We're going to get to your general fund and your unassigned fund balance in a minute. That's the short-term perspective. But in our professional opinion, any conversation about a local government or school district's financial statements would be incomplete without at least referring to 2 key things in your long-term perspective balance sheet here on page 12. I sort of mentioned them already, the 2 large estimates that are in here. Your net pension liability, I may refer to that as your NPL, or your net pension liability, and your net OPEB liability. OPEB is an acronym for Other Post-Employment Benefits, and by other, they mean other than pension. What does that specifically mean? It's retiree health care. So, in our opinion, a conversation about the school district's financial statements would be incomplete. I know we recognize that some readers want to hop right to the general fund and talk about the general fund, but in our opinion, it would be incomplete to talk about Concord School District's financial statements without at least pointing out, about 2/3 of the way down the page in that column of numbers on page 12, about 2/3 of the way down, you see your net pension liability with an account balance as of June 30th of 2022 of just under $61 million, $60,764,000. And right below that is your net OPEB liability with a liability as of 6/30/22 of $24,990,000.
Quick question, and Jack, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this or you will, and thank you as well for presenting. Do you know if that includes the latest bill from the state legislature that says they absorb some of the retirement costs or reimburse the district?
No, that's just going to be what our liability
Just
is
our
as of June 30th.
Okay.
So it would not include anything like that.
Thank you.
One other thing, Scott, to clarify, if I'm remembering right from when we did this a couple years ago, the net OPEB liability of $24 million also includes those 65 and older that might be on our health plan, but we pay nothing for them. But under the law, they're allowed to be on our plan, hence why we own that liability.
That is correct. That is correct. So,
Do we know what percentage of that 24?
There's like 383 people that are on, that are 65 and older. So do you see that break? Yeah, because that would be provided by our.
that breakdown is
we
in
can
your
do that.
actuarial report. It's not in the financial statements, but that breakdown is in the report. So
Yep.
it's
So that'd
very,
be NIHART.
yes,
Yep.
it would. Yep.
And we could get you that.
So just just want to spend a couple minutes on these 2 account balances, and if you'd like us to expand, we can. On the net pension liability of, I'll round up to $61 million. Just as a point of reference, a year ago that was $86 million. So it's come down significantly. But here's the thing that's important for the reader to understand, and it's highlighted in here. Because the New Hampshire retirement system is also a June 30 year end, and the standards permit this, Your liability that we just said is as of 6/30/22. It's actually measured as of June 30th, 21. You use what is known as a prior year measurement date. Perfectly permissible under the standards. Now, why is that important in this point? Because investment returns through 6/30/21 were very strong. That's why the liability went from 86 million down to 61 million. When we complete your 6/30/23 audit and your liability, your proportional share of the New Hampshire retirement system's liability that relates to your district, it'll be measured as of 6/30/22. I make no predictions as to what will happen to that liability, but you'll be able to tell in about 2 months when those reports come out. But obviously, I think the expectation is that liability would probably go up significantly based on market returns, at least through 6/30/22. Just keep that in mind.
But the nice thing for you from a budgetary standpoint is it's going down for 2 years because the rates have been lowered. It's about 800,000, but
Yeah.
that's the good part.
And also, thank you, Jack, for pointing that out. And this may be where questions would come from. Is what you pay into the system is very different than what this liability is. It's statutorily determined versus actuarially determined. It's a little bit more complex than that, but it's based on a funding schedule, not the financial statement liability. So, and just because I spoke about it a couple of times, if you look about a third of the way down the page, you see deferred outflows of resources related to pensions and OPEB, and then almost at the bottom of the page, you see deferred inflows of resources related to pensions and OPEB. When I said pension-related accounts, that's what I'm referring to. And if you'd like, I can get into them, ask me questions if you'd like, but those are important accounts that you should be aware of. I'll pause, and since it's such a small group, before I move into the general fund and the unassigned fund
Could you
balance.
just pause 1 second? I just heard from someone watching at home that we're going in and out, so.
Video or audio?
Both.
It should be okay.
Okay.
Sometimes the stream.
I'll take an accounting fact sheet
Okay,
in the meantime.
Great, okay. Go on.
Sure, I had just paused. I don't want to turn this into all pension and OPEB conversation, but before we move into the general fund, I will stop for a moment to see if any members here do have any specific questions on those pension and OPEB liabilities and related accounts.
Is that our unfunded liability, or just our as the state calculates it, or is it just the total liability for current employees, what their pensions will be?
It's your total, so it's present employees and retirees. It's your proportional share. It's based on.
So it's our proportional share of sort of what the state is paying down for the unfunded liability as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, then if I could ask you to turn a couple of pages into the document to page 14. Again, I think it's important to discuss pension and OPEB, but we certainly recognize that most readers, or many readers, are going to turn to the general fund balance sheet, which is on page 14. It's the first column of numbers. You do have a grants fund that's shown here. The purpose of that, or the reason for it being shown separately, is quantitatively it meets a criteria that makes it or defines it as a major fund, so it stands alone as its own balance sheet and on page 16 an operating statement. And then the non-major governmental funds is really just a consolidation or an aggregation of all of your other funds that don't meet that major fund criteria. But the focus here is on this page is going to be the general fund, or the first column of numbers, and very specifically it's the third number up from the bottom. It's your unassigned fund balance with a June 30, 2022 account balance of $2.1 million. As a point of reference, that represents about 2.4% of your general fund expenditures. And further, that number is often compared with it's the same related account from the prior year. And between June 30, 21 and June 30, 22, this key unassigned fund balance dropped about $300,000. And we'll see why in a moment when we start looking at the budget versus actual page. And actually, I'm going to actually take you at one, we'll wrap up the conversation about going back to management's discussion and analysis, where the district put a nice write-up in there so that you can really see why that key account balance went down by $300,000. There's two other accounts on here I do want to point out. Right above the unassigned is your assigned fund balance of a little over $1.1 million. Generally speaking, that represents your encumbrances that are carried forward into the new fiscal year and honored in fiscal year 23. And above that is your committed fund balance. Specifically, that represents your capital reserve funds. And if you were to look on page 10, there's actually a detail to what makes up that $18.4 million by type of capital reserve that you have. So, within your own accounting records, those capital reserves are shown outside of your, or in a different fund other than your general fund, but for formal reporting purposes, Jack and our firm have to consolidate them into the general fund for standard setting purposes. So. The last page, one of the last pages I want to turn to, I go over two pages to page 16.
Could you just give a couple examples of the non-major governmental
Sure.
funds?
I may have to call on Megan here, but I know school lunch is in there. And, yep, and I have to turn to a particular page in your financial statements to get a little bit more specific. And the more I go, if you're following, I went to page 31, which shows some detail there. And now it does bring me back to the fact that your school lunch fund is, I think, the only thing that's in that non-major fund. As I said before, it doesn't quantitatively does not meet the criteria to be shown as a major fund, so it's shown as a non-major governmental fund. But I really think it's just the school lunch fund that's in there.
Great, thank you.
So just a real quick note over on page 16. I'm going to really focus on the top third of this, and in the revenue section, just above the total revenues, you see rows for state revenues and federal revenues. As you might expect, and I'm sure you all know this anyway, with the COVID relief that's been out there, if you look at these two rows going left to right, in the general fund column, that state revenue number is up $1 million over the prior year. In the grants fund, that federal revenue is up $1 million over the prior year. And in the non-major governmental fund, that federal revenue number is up a couple $1 million over the prior year. So there's a little bit of a theme there, that the intergovernmental revenue, the state and predominantly federal aid in fiscal year 22 was up significantly over fiscal 21. I think that's just worthy of pointing out.
Well, and I was going to ask, so under the federal revenue, does the ESSER funds of the state, is that included in that?
Yes.
Okay.
In that grants
In the grants.
column. Yep.
Grants column. Get that.
Fund 1222.
Thank you.
And then the last page I want to turn to is towards the end of the document. It's print page 46. And this is your general fund budget and actual comparative schedule. So it shows in the second column, the first column is clearly your original budget. The second column is your final budget, the actual amounts of the third, and then the final column on the right is the variance between the actual and the budget. And focusing on that last column of numbers, you can see that in total, the district collected about $2.1 million in additional revenues, more than what was anticipated by the budget. And you see a lot of that in the state revenue line. You see a lot of that in the miscellaneous revenue line, which is some E-rate. The miscellaneous line is the E-rate reimbursements that the district and a lot of districts in the state received in fiscal year 22. On the other side of the equation, on the expenditure side of the equation, about 2/3 of the way down the page, you see your total expenditures were less than the budget by about $1.2 million. So collectively, the $2.1 million in favorable revenues, plus the favorable expenditure side of $1.2 million, is your $3.3 million in I would categorize that as favorable budgetary results of operations. And as a result of that being so favorable, the district didn't need to bring in some of its capital reserve money that was anticipated in the budget. That's why the budget anticipated transferring in about $2 million from the capital reserve fund. You only needed to bring in about $356,000. So you show an unfavorable variance in your transfers in that you didn't draw in from your capital reserves because revenues were so favorable and the expenditures were so favorable, there was not a need to do so. So collectively, all three pieces there yield in the lower right-hand corner of this page positive budgetary results of operations of $2.1 million. So how does that reconcile, if you will, with your unassigned fund balance going down $300,000? Key thing to point out. In the final budget column, second row up from the bottom, the use of fund balance to reduce taxes of $2.4 million. If you take that 2.1, and pardon me, the use of fund balance, you're not anticipating revenues to come in. You're drawing on essentially an existing savings account as a revenue source. You're not really expecting an inflow of a resource to there in fiscal year 22. So if you take that $2.1 million in favorable budgetary results and back out 2.4, we're at negative $300,000, which is exactly what your unassigned fund balance changed by. So now, if I could quickly draw your attention back to page 9, at the very bottom of page 9, you see essentially what we were just talking about there with your unassigned fund balance of 2.1. A year ago it was 2.4, went down by 300,000. Now in the paragraph right above that table at the bottom, it says just what we looked at on the budget versus actual page. It says that the favorable budgetary results of operations were $2.1 million, but you used $2.4 million in unassigned fund balance, and therefore that's how you reconcile your budgetary results of operations with your actual change in your unassigned fund balance. So if you have only one takeaway this evening, I'm going to modify that statement in a minute, but let me complete it. If you want the one takeaway from the actual number piece of this conversation is this sentence here in this particular paragraph. Strong budgetary results of operations, when you soften it by the fact that you drew on some fund balance, that's what caused your unassigned fund balance to decrease a very small amount of $300,000. That's the financial takeaway, if you will. The other piece that I think, this is why I sort of corrected myself, that I would, in addition to the number part, I think really what we started talking about with the fact that our audit went well and we did not need to propose any significant audit entries as a result of our work, that should be the primary takeaway. Those two things combined. One can't exist without the other.
Could you clarify what would qualify in a scenario as significant?
Sure. If we found that the district wasn't reconciling its cash and the bank statement reconciliation didn't match the general ledger, and we could see what it was, and we went to Jack and Maureen and said, we think an entry is necessary here to correct this. That would be significant. Now, significant also can be referred to as material. If cash was off and we needed to propose an entry to get it reconciled, no matter, unless it was completely trivial, like a couple of $100 or something, that would be considered significant because it's cash, susceptible to risk and things like that. But if another account balance was off by even a few $1,000s, or a receivable was off a few $1,000s, that would be insignificant.
Got it.
So,
Thank you.
you bet. It's a very common question we get. So, we also issued, and I think will be distributed to the whole committee, was what we refer to as a governance letter. I don't know if you put it on your website yet. I don't remember.
After this meeting, we're set
Yeah,
to post it
copies.
all.
Great. It's addressed to the school board. By and large, I think what it says is everything we've talked about tonight, other than the numbers pieces. The governance letter basically tells you the standards that we followed, Our responsibility, your responsibility, the fact that we did not need to propose any significant audit entries. It talks about estimates in there, and that there were no disagreements in how to apply generally accepted accounting principles. It's not in that, just, I see you looking in there, it's not in that bound document that you have. It will be, if it hasn't been, it will be distributed to the full school committee. Know that when you get it, it's probably, what, 7 pages, Megan? By and large, those 3 things we just talked about a couple of times tonight is really the substance of what that letter is all about. So, it's a super fast walkthrough of our audit of your financial statements. Hopefully, we've addressed some of your questions as we've gone through here, but we're certainly able to try to answer any other questions that the committee may have.
Mr. Richards, do you have any? Mr. Weinberg? Were there any governance findings about our internal controls or anything that we need to be looking at or working on as a district?
We did not issue a management letter specifically. Okay. Some of the things that we talked about, we talked a lot about compensated absences this year. That's an account balance on your balance sheet that was, I think, just above or certainly right around your pension and OPEB liabilities. That's certainly an account balance to watch. I know Jack had talked to us at length and field work back in the fall about work to control that liability.
Is this our sick leave,
Yes.
vacation leave that we owe in place?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing to be mindful of going forward is, and we're suggesting this to all of our clients, is accounting standards changes. There are some really big ones, as we say, on the horizon. You implemented a big one here in fiscal year 22. It was the GASB, or the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, their statement number 87 on leases. There's a couple of others. Statement, I'll butcher the numbers. There's a couple of new ones for fiscal year 23 that you need to be aware of. And we're telling all of our clients to keep an eye on what those standard setters do later this year, where there's what I think is a very nice model where you have long-term perspective financial statements and short-term, and by short-term it's almost a cash basis. Standard setters are going to take this, giving you my opinion here, very nice workable model, and they're going to change it. Why is that important? Is because it's going to be a lot of work for the district to implement that type of, if they do change it. They're not going to vote on it until I think April, but if they do implement it, it'll be at least fiscal 25. My instinct tells me it'll be fiscal 26 before you have to do it, but there will be prep work to do. And there would be a significant amount of work to prepare for, it's called a reporting model change. Instead of the model that we just looked at, it will look different. So.
I think one of the things that was noted that's coming, I think it starts next year, is all our software will need to be cataloged, what we have, how long it's from, till, and we've already started that process.
Yep.
Matter of fact, I got the first initial list today, because as we prepare the budget.
Yep.
But I think for the GASB 96, is that the right number? I know that was a big one that's coming.
You're right, Jack. It is statement 96, and real quickly, not to keep you, but the one you implemented this year was statement 87 on leases. Now, I know I'm being recorded, but this is my opinion. When they wrote the lease standard, the standard setters left out software. But what they were really getting at by implementing the standard is they thought the reader should know what commitments for future payments governments were on the hook for, if you will. And I think they missed the boat, and I think they realized they missed the boat by leaving out subscription-based information technology arrangements. Specifically excluded from Statement 87. So what did they do? They wrote Statement 96. It's the lease standard, but it applies to SPITA, S-B-I-T-A, subscription-based information technology arrangements. So everything that the district did to prepare for 87, which wasn't much because, as Jack explained to Megan and I in depth, you don't lease a lot. Not a lot of governments do. But subscription-based information technology arrangements, particularly in the education world, we think is going to be significant.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Scott and Megan, do you have any, after finishing this and I always look at an audit as an opportunity to look at areas for us to improve, to be more efficient. Are there any other recommendations as you perused mountains of paper and obviously things that were on our Munis system? Is there any recommendations you can make for us as, Jack and I work to make sure we're as efficient as possible?
Sure. The recommendation that, in addition to being prepared for the upcoming GASBs that we make to a lot of our clients, because it's so big right now, is cybersecurity. That is a huge risk to any organization. But I think it's really big in governments right now. It's really big in governments. So make sure you brush up on all your policies and your test work in that area. That could probably go a long way towards enhancing, a strong internal control environment that you have. But I think it's an area that any organization should constantly take a look at. So.
That is an area that we have spent some time on, implementing the MFA so that, we have multiple ways to authenticate work when we're on our systems, when we're using our systems. So our tech director has been, she doesn't let much get by us and,
Good.
And really strengthening our systems, In many ways, Google has been a problem around security and moving towards Outlook. So there's stronger ways in which we can be protected. So thank you. That's a great recommendation.
The other one
Continue
in
that.
organizations like the district, and what I'm really getting at there is, where there's a lot of employees, expense reimbursements. It can always be an area where there is risk, and certainly tightening up and ensuring adherence to a strong policy is very important. It's not always big dollars,
Right.
but they sometimes get a lot of scrutiny.
They add up.
They add up.
Is that just in general, not based on anything specific you've observed?
Just in general. We did not notice any issues in our test work, but it's an area that, particularly with schools, we talk to a lot of our schools about just ensuring that your policies and procedures and adherence to them. I certainly, we have some clients that have very good policies, but if the policy isn't followed, it's not very good. So adherence to a strong policy is critical.
Do you have examples of reimbursements that you would think, employee reimbursements, that you'd highlight?
In many years ago, I with my who's now retired, my partner John Sullivan, we were doing an analysis of some reimbursements, and I guess there's also some real life practicality to this in my own firm, where if I attend a CPE or continuing professional education, let's say I happen to sign up for it myself, and I seek reimbursement for it. Well, I don't get reimbursed for that until I get a certificate that I attended the conference. Why is that? Because as I was mentioning a minute ago with my partner John Sullivan, he's been retired now for a few years, we found situations where, I'll use myself as the example, registered for a conference, reimbursed for it, but then at the last minute I couldn't go to the conference. So now, in this particular case, a community had reimbursed me for a conference that I didn't attend. So that's an area that I have seen over my 30-plus years of doing this type of work can be a risky area. Again, not big dollars, but those can be embarrassing situations. And so adherence to strong policies is critical. That's just one example. I'm kind of put myself in there, but it's a real life example that we have seen in our audit work over the last 30-plus years. Again, not here, but other places. I share it because your reaction, as if I can say, is I saw some people nodding. Yeah, you can see how something like that could happen, and it does happen.
Well, there's a lot of that work that's underway in our district around reimbursements, whether it's course reimbursement,
Yes.
Professional meetings and so forth,
Yep.
or
Mileage reimbursements.
mileage. I mean, those constantly run across our desks, so we do have specific criteria which must be followed in order for reimbursement, because, you know, we have 1,000 employees and lots of things happening, so that's good advice for us, though, to pay attention to that.
Thank you.
You mind if I just highlight three
Yep.
things? I just want to make sure one of the things, well, first I want to thank you for the work you did and all the people that we have, because a little over a year ago, all the people you've dealt with besides me are all new. So the fact, this was my biggest concern when I had the mass retirement business office, was getting through this, because all new people, but they've done a fantastic job from what it seems, and, you know, I appreciate it. The other thing that we focus in trying to make these financials look good, we're gonna be coming on a middle school project soon. And I'm always trying to make sure that these financials look strong when we go into Moody's, S&P. How important is this as it goes to interest rates, long-term bonds, and that kind of thing?
We think it's very important. You know, your capital reserve, roughly $10 million. For an organization of this size, I think that's an appropriate amount, and one that will be looked at favorably when it comes to the interest rates that you're able to obtain. I think the fact you've had the turnover, but, you know, a constant person in your chair will also be viewed favorably. Getting back to policies and procedures, it may seem crazy or maybe trivial, but organizations that are rated by not standard setters, rating agencies, they look at the strength and adherence to policies and procedures. All of those things would help contribute to a rating, which would help contribute to what rate you are able to obtain in issuing. You say earlier today, $100 million for the
Upwards of
upwards
$100 million for
of that.
middle school, yeah.
So I think all of those things are important. You do have limited control over your net pension liability, but there are certainly things that can be done. I've certainly seen organizations try to bring that number down, sort of buy it down in situations like that. Those are things that the district could consider. Your OPEB liability, there's not many organizations in the state of New Hampshire. I know of only one that has set up a trust to help start funding that. So you would actually set aside in an actual trust some money to fund that future liability. You do that, and the interest rate that you apply, the discount rate that you can apply to that liability can tend to creep up. And as that discount rate creeps up, the liability creeps down. And that is certainly something that could be seen as favorable. Obviously, I think it would be incomplete. It's probably stating the obvious, but to do that, you need to set funds aside in the operating budget. You need to set them aside to the OPEB trust to help reduce that liability. That's stating the obvious, I know, but I think I should put that on the table. But that can help the organization obtain a better rating, which could in turn help generate a better interest rate on the future debt that you have. And if you were ever to refinance, I know you just did a refinancing in fiscal '21. Don't know when it could be done again, but with a better rating, you might end up getting a better interest rate. Although if you did it in '21, you probably are not going to get a better.
We did
better,
real good.
Yeah,
Real good.
As soon as those words came out of my mouth, I realized, wait a minute, that's
Is
not
there
likely to
any
happen.
public entity in New Hampshire that has paid down their pension liability
I'm not aware of one.
in neighboring states? I don't
Pardon
know.
me?
In neighboring states that you serve?
Yes, I'm very much aware of, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, even members that are part of a regional system like the New Hampshire system. It would be the equivalent of a county system in the Commonwealth of Mass. I'm certainly aware that organizations have contributed in excess to, I'll call it the ADC, or actuarially determined contribution. If a city or town's actuarially determined to put in $5 million, the organization might put in $7 million for a couple of years to help bring down that liability. Just made up those numbers. Those aren't accurate, but
No, just
it's
curious.
an illustration.
as much as the liability, the instability of how much it's gonna go up each year and, or down in this one situation, you know.
It certainly has fluctuated a lot over the last couple of years. And I'll say it out loud, where I think it will fluctuate again at when they measure it as of 6/30/22. They really dropped the discount rate a couple of years ago, which brought the investment earnings up. Pardon me, it brought the liability up. And then when the market was running really strong, it brought the liability down. And again, I'll say it again, kind of expect that liability to go back up. So it's that fluctuation, very explainable to a rating agency in financial institutions. They'll understand it, but they'll look predominantly at the percentage that the system itself is funded, not just your proportional share. That number's in the back of your financial statements. It's probably not relevant to look at what its funding status was as of 6/30/21. It's probably more relevant to look at 6/30/22, as by the time that report is issued, you'll be closer to perhaps issuing a significant amount of bonds.
And the last thing I want to mention on the page 9, so we have the unassigned fund balance, total general fund expenditures 2.39%. I think we had a conversation about how the state had changed the RSA, going from 2.5% to 5%.
Yep.
We had the board vote to increase that slightly. I think we had 1 year 2.54. Even though the law said 5, I think there was concern that because the law changed in the middle of the fiscal year, as a precaution, we had them vote to do that. But I always find it I don't want to take any more than I have to, but the fact that they've upped that to 5, it's okay to stay low. Only keep as much as we feel we need. I mean, I don't want to have 5% of the general fund just to carry forward. I just don't think that's sound budgeting myself. I think having this as low as we can is better.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, you, unlike a city or well, there we go again. So it was nice. Unlike a city or town, other than the city of Concord, every other organization, every other city or town collects their property taxes only twice a year. So that's where an organization may need a higher fund balance for cash flow purposes.
Yeah.
Again, you're related to the city of Concord, who is the only city or town in the state that bills and collects on a quarterly basis. Nonetheless, you get your money on a monthly basis, essentially speaking. So you have a steady stream. It's not as if you are only collecting your largest revenue source twice a year. You're collecting it on a monthly basis. If you only had it if your revenues only came in twice a year, you would probably need a higher fund balance, closer to 5%.
And we work with the city. When
Oh, yeah.
we put the payment schedule, we have cash flow coming in at a time where it's tough for them. So those schedules are all worked on mutually to make sure that all this works well.
Yep.
So, great. Thank you. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Weinberg?
I guess generally, not specifically pertaining to this report, have you noticed, working with districts across New Hampshire, if state funding has remained stagnant or if it's decreased or increased, generally?
Generally, I think I could only really speak about 21 to 22, just that time frame. And I think that if we go back to, I think it was page 14, the revenue and expenditure statement, that first column of numbers, I think that state aid revenue number was up $1 million from fiscal year 21 to 22. So that's just talking about the state. The federal numbers, which was the row below it, and the other columns, those were up significantly. But the state revenue was up in fiscal year 22.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like I've gone over. Sorry about that, folks.
I think 45 minutes for the audit of the district is
very
appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
At least 45 minutes.
Connecting. I'm just trying to connect and. Is there a
Like
reason
Connect?
it's not, no.
SAU at conference room, you're picking that?
Conference room or boardroom?
No, conference.
Oh, it literally says it right
They
there.
changed it because the one
Whoa.
broke, and we swapped it out. We had two of them, the Dewey room one, and then, I'm sorry, Kathleen's went, and this one went.
Perfect. There we go. No wonder I couldn't connect. I'm just on autopilot. All right. So I was asked really, I know Jack said grants. I'm always happy to talk about any grant, but given the request really to talk about ARP, ESSER, I just put together a few really quick key slides to give you some updates. My aim today is, or tonight is really just to provide some compliance updates and let you know where we stand on. This is also
Well, in the meantime, while you're connecting, what does ARP stand for?
American Rescue Plan,
Thank you.
also known as ESSER 3. This is also known as ESSER 3. It says it's connected online. Let's try again. Nothing? No dice? Thank you. It says I'm connected, so. This also lives in the board folder as well, thank you, if you need it. But so my aim tonight is provide some compliance updates, and then I would like to share kind of what we have left as an unbudgeted balance, and then give some options of what that could potentially be used for within our use of funds plan. Thank you. Looks like it's gonna work. Okay, that works. That works. I can. I think there's. I don't really want the next slide though, because I want it to be able to. Can I change the mode so it's not?
Sorry, technical difficulties.
Yeah. Well, it just
Oh, no.
second screen. Is that what I need to do?
Second screen or extend,
Yeah,
probably.
That's what I
I
did.
do. Oh,
I
extend
did
didn't work?
It
extend,
shouldn't boot you off like that, though. That's no good.
and now my computer is. I hit second screen.
All right, well, let me see if I can.
I could just go make copies.
Dealing with it.
Do you want to just go make copies of the?
Yeah, sure.
It's in the. It's in.
And I'll try
Oh,
to get it put on the screen if you want to run and do that, because it's in the folder, right?
it's in
Yeah,
the folder.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. But yeah, I'm hitting extend and nothing's happening. So
Okay. See if I can get it pulled up.
that's probably the easiest.
Oh, nice, that's one.
Actually, I'm gonna replace the. I don't think it's your machine. I think it's the.
Okay.
We already had one go this week, one of those little mirror casts. Will be the third one. All right.
We just talked about liabilities, Jack.
I think you need to get.
Do
Hey,
you
for
want to
46
run and make
bucks.
copies? Because Mr. Weinberg doesn't have his computer.
Computer. Yeah.
anyway, so-
Jack, are you able
Yeah,
to
I'm gonna try to load it. If you
print
wanna go
it?
make copies while I'm waiting,
Oh,
it won't hurt.
okay.
I'll just get into the drive and then he'll have that.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I asked Kathleen too before. I said, should I make copies? It's digitally accessible.
This one will have a different
But-
name.
Yeah, no
This one
problem.
will be probably the
Okay.
SAU 8 boardroom.
Great. Great.
It's actually
Dewey room. All right. Hopefully. Says it's connected on my end.
Jack, looks like the, I don't know.
It's probably because of extend.
Up in the
Yeah.
corner.
Yeah, it's just asleep.
Duplicate.
That probably will be it. Yeah.
All right. Let me get out a presentation. No dice. I'm just
Yeah,
gonna go.
give me
make
a copy. I can't even get on the folder, so there's something bigger going on than
Okay.
just this. So,
What, you mean the screen?
yeah. I mean, I'm trying to log into Google Docs to get into that folder, but that's all right. It just-
What is Rich? Get HDMI straight to the CD. That's a foolproof way, so.
Sure. You okay? All right.
Full on China shop, don't mind me.
No. Josh and I went to high school together. We were the same year at Concord High.
Now?
So,
I think
it a
I think
network
the network's
issue?
down. I think it's down.
the network.
Mr. Weinberg, do you want to come sit over here and you can share?
I
with
would
us?
be happy to.
I can give you mine with my notes on it too, if you would like.
No problem.
Here,
No.
here, you take
Well,
that.
here's the, you know what? Go ahead, ladies, you should do it now. You wanna go and attach to that HDMI cable directly? Hopefully it has a port.
You want this?
You can at least broadcast.
Are you sure?
I was gonna tell you all of it in there anyway, so.
Do you want your notes?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Have an HDMI port
Right there.
on your computer there. I don't think it does.
No.
I think I looked.
Okay.
I think after
Okay,
18 months of COVID.
We would be professional.
that's okay.
I have for work an adapter, but I don't
A
know.
dongle, yeah, I have a dongle too, but it's like a Mac dongle.
You can't get on.
All right,
Problem.
well, yeah, I don't know why it's,
Well, that probably makes sense why they can't watch then too. Didn't you say there were problems with people?
It's just sound going
Oh,
in.
just sound.
okay, anyway, so, compliance updates and to be able to go through just some different options with the balance that we have for our ESSER 3. So I just first wanted to say in the fall, we had our program monitoring for ESSER, all of the ESSERs through the Department of Education. The final report was issued a few weeks ago. There were no findings, which is great. So no corrective action plan was required. I believe that was sent out to the board as well, the full board. So you should all have access to that. It's just a quick little cover letter, and then just additional. Thank you. It let you know what they looked for. You know what the tests were. We also submitted ahead of schedule our use of funds plan updates early on in the month. So that has been submitted to the Department of Ed, and it has been posted on our website as well. The DOE has confirmed receipt, and then it looks good, but they'll reach out if they have any other questions about it. There were no major updates to it. It was really an explanation of our expenditures. And it's the template looks a little bit different. Unfortunately, the feds changed the requirements, so it's a little bit hard to read, but it is available publicly on the website as well. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And then if you can go to the next, there you go. The last piece that I wanted to mention is our maintenance of equity requirement. That's something that the state monitors themselves, and they compare what we're spending in our ESSER funds with the DOE 25. So what are we expending as a district, and then how are we using the ESSER funds? And it essentially, in like the most broad terms, it requires us to spend, level funding and not use the ESSER funds to reduce our local contribution to education.
So that's different than the requirement to allocate funds to like other local schools, like that are private and charter.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's equitable services.
Okay.
Yes, but yes, the equity piece essentially means, are you spending, the same at Runlet out of your general funds, even though you have this excess COVID relief funding, or are you dipping in are you reducing your liability because you have these emergency funds, which you don't want to do. So that's it from compliance updates. The next piece is just letting you know where we stand with ESSER. So here's a quick little key for you. OYO means 1 year only. So these are the positions that really were intended as 1 year only, short term, largely learning loss positions that were funded. The bulk of our funding, both general fund and grant funds, does go to personnel, whether that's salary and benefits, depends on the fund, but a good portion of it, and ESSER is no exclusion to that. So these are all of the positions, the number of positions, and then the total FTE that's in the grant, the full-time equivalency, and then our cursory, very cursory thought as to where in the FY24 budget these positions could go. If there's a question mark there, that's one of the things I want to bring forward to you tonight. If there's an X, it's because it was intended as a 1 year only short-term position to help bridge those learning loss gaps. And we don't anticipate funding it through, putting it forward in budget sessions, nor in any other, grant funds, things like that. If there is something in there like IDEA, Title I, those really are potential places for these additional special educators, tutors, things like that. Those would be really good next steps if we feel that per pupil and per need we do need to add math tutors or we do need to add special educators. That's really the purpose of those grant funds, IDEA, Title I, Title III, same thing. If we felt like we needed additional FTE or additional position for an English language tutor, things like that, those would be appropriate places. Those grant funds would be appropriate places.
What's the difference between the math coach and the math tutor?
The coach is providing the the coaching for faculty as well as carrying a caseload of students that they're doing interventions with, and the tutor is solely seeing students.
And is there a difference in cost between?
Very much so, yeah. So the math coach is a certified educator. A tutor is either a paraprofessional, and they're paid based on the CIT scale. Versus.
Sometimes, they can be a teacher, a tutor, I've been a teacher that doesn't carry the certification. So it really is dependent on the person.
We have a number of retired teachers as well who are Title I tutors. They make great tutors, so we see
And
that
are
a lot.
they? Okay.
Yeah.
And
And is-
their work is often prescribed by the coach.
Yep.
So they work together to say, okay, these youngsters, and they looked at all the results of data, and they identified the youngsters that need support. And so it might be support given the intensity by the coach, or if it was less intense, maybe it was just practicing their fluency with multiplication facts or division, you know what I'm saying? So that they would assign that task to the tutor. But it really depended on what the youngsters needed. Does that help?
Yes. And they're currently funded by Title I?
They're
Or no? Or
so
that's
these
fine.
additional math tutors are currently funded in ESSER.
Okay.
Yep. So these are all 1 year only ESSER funded
But
positions.
we're saying that we could take those tutors and we could use our Title I funds next year and keep them.
Yep.
Okay, so that's, am I right?
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
I want to make
Yes.
sure I was right. Like the
Yes.
first position, the special educators, we can use our IDEA funds to cover the costs of special educators out of the IDEA, because the ESSER funds will, as you know, dry up.
I was just gonna, but we don't have like additional Title I funds coming in. We'd be taking it from something else.
Well,
What would we be taking from?
it's actually yes and. So the fund will not change. So that, Title I, it's always going to be Title I. It's not going to be like Title I-A, it is Title I-A, Title I, extra, whatever. However, the Consolidated Appropriations Act that just passed has a lot of extra money coming. So I anticipate that our entitlement and our IDEA appropriations our allocations are going to be a little bit higher per pupil. So I think it's fair to absolutely level fund it conservatively when we're thinking, about the FY24 budget. But for two reasons, I would be comfortable, earmarking some of the money before we know our actual dollar figures. A, because both Title I and IDEA in particular are based on student need. So if we're saying we have more students who need this and it warrants it, that means our allocation is going to be higher. If we're identifying more special education students, enough to warrant 4 more special educators, that means our IDEA allocation is going to be larger next year for FY24.
Okay, but we're
So-
picking, say, we're giving money to the math tutor from Title I as opposed to, we're making that conscious decision and saying, you know
As
what?
opposed to reading
We're not giving it to
tutors.
a reading
Correct.
person because
Correct.
we
Yep.
think it's more important here than there.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. And that is something that we do. I mean, we do that now in figuring out, is it this much in personnel, this much in supplies? Do we want to have an extended day program at this school versus this school? So we're constantly having those conversations just to weigh the needs and looking at the data. It's really based on the data dives that are done.
And would all of the schools be eligible for Title I?
We
tutors?
don't know that. I am concerned a little bit about Abbott Downing, given their numbers. They've been on the cusp. So I would be concerned
And
about
that's the only one that's
about that's the only one that I'm concerned
So,
about.
so this is where the plug comes for the free and reduced lunch application.
Yes. Please fill out public. Please fill out your free and reduced lunch.
Did I say free and reduced
Yeah.
lunch applications?
Yes.
I just want to make sure I said.
Yeah.
Yes, and fill them out because it'll help us not only with
This
that,
is
but with
why.
our tutors and
This is
other
why.
positions.
Yes. It's
You
true.
know, and this was done in collaboration with our building principals. So it wasn't, we weren't sitting here at the office and making these decisions, but discussing the situation with the folks in the buildings. And Ellen has, as part of her responsibilities, is visiting with each school, each principal, and discussing this with them, along with our data meetings, as you know we have.
Yeah, we do true it up
Yeah.
pretty regularly just to make sure. If we have vacancies for tutors, for instance, where can we reallocate that? Do we want to contract out for, similar tutoring services, things like that? But I think it would be a nice place, again, if the need warrants, if the allocation, the eligibility all aligns. Certainly, Title I could absorb some of those positions if the need continues.
So for the allocations, that's the big thing. We struggle with this every year because we won't know that number
We
until,
won't.
was it April, May?
At the very earliest,
Yeah.
April, it was as late as the end of July last
Yeah,
year.
last year was rough. But,
Yeah.
so we level fund, we put people in positions like this. You pass the budget, but when that allocations come out, then we true it all up and then work with the schools and add what's needed.
Yeah.
So,
And I will say, the first thing we do is look at the projections for personnel. Our intention, we always have enough in allocations to cover our essential personnel. So that's never up in the air, for sure. It might be money for supplies or things like that, but if there's a need, that is what is prioritized, is the personnel. And then all the other stuff comes with it, interventions and things like that. So here's the snapshot. Now, given all of that, when we end the year at 6:30, we will have spent. We've already spent several $1 million toward our learning loss requirement, so we will have met that. We've also budgeted additional funding for that moving forward that we anticipate spending into FY24. So that requirement, we can kind of check that off. It's all budgeted. We're good to go on that.
Well, From a budget standpoint, we might be able,
But
from
correct.
a compliance standpoint, we might be able to check it off. I just want to make sure we're keeping that.
From a program standpoint, have we shrunk those gaps? Correct. Yes. That is a good distinction. Yes, we've met the 20% in our budgeting, but
Is that an occupational therapist?
yes, OT. Yep.
And we were using ESSER funds for that?
Yeah. So for right now we have a district. She's split between buildings, and yeah, that position could fit into IDEA, obviously, because she is providing services to students with IEPs. However, if we do put it into IDEA, it is not medically Medicaid reimbursable,
The
obviously.
reason for that was an additional position. After the budget had been approved.
That's why it went into IDEA,
Right.
into
ESSER,
ESSER.
Superintendent, was that because we didn't have students in schools and we needed to be able to move that around? And now we have people in schools, or is that something that was just the demand of the student needs required?
The demand of student needs at all levels required, particularly at the elementary school. When I say all levels, really the elementary, starting with pre-K up through grade 5. So the demand was there, and John recommended that we add that position to use our ESSA funds.
Do we know how much of that position we could fund with Medicaid reimbursements?
I don't know what what the rate is. I mean, all of her services would be, Medicaid eligible, like all of the things that she's doing. I don't know what that would net, but we certainly could look into that. I can ask Molly. Yeah.
So we use a third-party company to help us manage that called MSP.
Yeah.
And we can talk with them to say what realistically would that be based on the history. Because you know how transparent healthcare is.
Yeah.
That's what's so challenging. I mean, last year we brought in a little over $700,000 in Medicaid money. So, I expect that for this budget, we'll probably bring in a higher number, but it's really looking at the past and trying to come up with some number. But obviously, if that picks up even half of it, it's worth it because you're just getting some of it reimbursed.
It's just a good thing to keep in mind. That's also why we don't have, the educational assistants who are doing some of the, therapeutic work. That's why we don't have them in IDEA, so we can net that back.
Yeah.
So given all of that, when push comes to shove, when we've kind of spent down the end of the year, all of our encumbrances, we'll have a little bit over $500,000. Jack, if you don't mind, just going to the next slide. Unencumbered, unbudgeted, and we have through the end of the federal fiscal year, so September 2024, to spend down those funds. So these are some of the options in speaking with building principals, in speaking with the superintendent and business administrator, and really the rest of the team, assistant superintendents as well. Some of the things that have emerged that may be good options, and we really are kind of coming to the committee, and if you choose to bring it to the full board, to maybe make some recommendations or get a sense from the public in the best way to budget these funds. So one is obviously the math model that has been implemented through ESSER. We certainly could use the funds to provide one more year of comfortably 3 math coaches. Again, could also assume that some of the math tutoring could be put into Title I if the need bears out. And we anticipate that it would cost about $345, $350. Those are numbers based on the step increases of 3 actual current employees. So I did use real numbers for these, but of course it depends on the positions that were crafted for these individuals. Again, that would be just for one more year. The funding would run out. So then it would be a conversation about whether those positions are dissolved or if they get absorbed into the general fund.
Note that, remember, we do have a math coordinator, so we still, but that position is in your budget.
Yes. Another option is to kind of replicate what we're doing with the HVAC system at BGS at Beaver Meadow. It's near or at end of life.
You might want to go past that. I'm 30 years old.
So, right. We have, as you know, was proposed in the use of funds plan, very early on to renovate the broken ground HVAC system. So we could use the balance of ESSER funds to replicate that at Beaver Meadow. It would just essentially offset a larger general fund investment, though. So, knowing that as we move into budget season for sure. Given supply chain, we may need to, there's a lot of paperwork that goes along with construction, but we're old pros at that, and it may require a waiver to extend the funding through the beginning of 2025. Just we're anticipating that, so just know that if we go with that option, we're on top of it. Another thing, just given needs, would be some social work services. So the Runlet social worker is currently one full-time equivalency fully out of ESSER, 100%. And then we also have the homeless education coordinator. Part of that will be funded next year and through FY25, half of it. That position will be funded through a McKinney-Vento competitive grant, so we have that's secure. But if we feel that it is a full-time position, which is what it is now, it will need 0.5. The balance of that position will need to come from somewhere.
So this is suggesting to make it from full-time to half.
It would be, we could fund half-time for another year out of ESSER. Again, anything with positions.
Fund the other half.
The McKinney-Vento would, yes, yeah, that's a sure thing.
Is McKinney-Vento annual?
For 3 years, yeah.
But
competitive.
Competitive, we have to. Is it based on?
Could we get it again? Yes.
Okay.
It is based on
Okay.
enrollment. Yep. Yep. And eligibility. Yep.
Got it.
Yes. So that's another option. Cybersecurity, we were just talking about that a little bit. Our director of IT has prepared, a kind of a priority list for cybersecurity, so we could use the balance of ESSER funds to offset the investment in that. Project C, so this is a kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit. So Project C, we have some assistants that there are 4 of them currently, very varying FTEs. They provide science instruction in the classroom while the teachers are attending PLCs, professional learning community meetings, embedded within the school day. In the past, this has been funded through Title II, which is a fair place to put it. However, that has run its course. It's really no longer a supplemental program if we're using those funds year over year over year. I would argue that we kind of, as a district, really should think about whether this is just part of our science education program. And so right now, again, we could fund that for 1 more year and then have the conversation about that program in the general fund in FY25. And the cost is about $125,000 between salary and benefits.
And the acronym is Science Educational Experience?
Yes.
Experiential
education.
One of those, okay.
Yes.
Those 2 words interchange.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, it's a great program, and it really is very much embedded and ingrained within this district. So, it seems I certainly don't say we nix the program. Don't get me wrong on that. Not at all.
And is this the one based at White's Farm? Yeah.
My
Yeah, they're
gut
housed
is-
there, and then
Thought so.
they do go into the elementary
My
schools.
gut
Yep.
is if somebody is watching this program, you will get an email about it. That's all I have to
Yes.
say about that.
There are a lot of fond memories from Project Sleep, myself included. Yeah. So, long-standing program, but it may be time, for the district to financially kind of step up and get it into the general fund. And then, of course, combination. Just, with my grants manager hat on, just ensuring that we're looking at the data. We are in alignment with the use of funds plan because that is something that we have surveyed our stakeholders on. So, we want to make sure that we're aligned, of course. And then just thinking about sustainability, which is, I always have that hat on as well. If we are going to do something that would have a cost beyond September 2024, are we prepared to, make those moves in the general fund or seek alternative funding ongoing as well?
509,000 is the undesignated at this
Correct.
point. How much is built into the proposed, how much is already slated for use in 2024? I see the wellness director position.
Oh, yeah. That's the only position.
That's the only position.
Yep. There's also some funds for, devices that we had in there.
Okay.
The big one is the 3.3 million of the broken ground HVAC. So that's the biggest chunk. That's in there. It's approved. Good to go. We're just waiting on the supplies, I believe, materials.
Can
So
you,
that's the biggest chunk.
for the construction waiver, can you just clarify what that?
Sure. So so the feds said, hey, we recognize that there are supply chain issues, so we can petition to have a waiver to have if we've obligated the funds for a construction project
You, like,
by
expedite it.
September 2024, we can say to the state and to the federal government, we can request that we actually have until the beginning of 2025 to draw down those funds.
Got it.
Typically, you have 45 days after the performance period ends. So we would just be saying, okay, please give us till the end of January or the end of February, whatever. We would be requesting that to draw down those funds because it's a reimbursement system. So we're obviously not going to, charge the grant before the work is done. And if the work isn't done until
Got it.
January, then yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think my last slide is just some additional considerations. I think I've summed a lot of these up, but just keeping in mind that we won't really know entitlement and IDEA allocations until late spring. I mentioned the Consolidated Appropriations Act, so I feel just looking at the forecast, I feel confident that absolutely level funding is level budgeting is a good way to go. We also do have our eye on some competitive funding as well, and of course are looking at that. There are a lot of things that are forecasted right now, and I'm going on grants.gov every day to see if it's been posted. So we're doing some of the legwork up front to look at some SAMHSA grants through the Department of Health and Human Services. So things like that.
For the Consolidated Appropriations Act, would that also be 1 year only for each
No,
of the
so
positions?
it's
or-
the biennial
Biennial.
budget.
Got it.
Yeah, so it
It's not
essentially.
biennial. The federal budget is not biennial.
I think the appropriations ends on the.
September 30th. Well, I don't actually know if we're going, I can't remember what the,
This is above and beyond the budget that was passed this year.
okay.
So,
Got it.
but to your point, I can check on when it will expire, when
Got it.
this money in the Consolidated Appropriations Act expires.
Thank you.
But yeah, there's a significant chunk of money that they've set aside. The other thing would be supplement, not supplant. So just thinking about now's the time where we can retroactively write things in. And we have done a significant amount of that, especially early on when we didn't know we were getting this money. But that does apply to formula funding. So once we take something and put it into the general fund, we can't put it back into a a grant fund, right? We're essentially saying we have the money to cover this locally, so we're not
But if
gonna.
we were using ESSER funds for it, we could move it to a formula.
Correct, yep. It can go between federal projects, yep. Yep. And then just, if we choose to fund additional positions, I would very strongly urge and I'd like to have a conversation about what's the if then for those positions. If we meet this goal, then we sustain it or we don't sustain it or whatever, just so there's some transparency around that. Health and dental insurance are variable, obviously by person, and dynamic even by person as well, with life changes. So we really try to avoid funding them through grants. ESSER really is the exception to that. But there always is the option, if we do fund a position, we can fund the salary and the associated FICA and New Hampshire retirement associated with it. But health and dental could be budgeted for in the general fund. That's possible. We do that. Construction does require a lot of paperwork, but we have it under control. And like I said, the supply chain piece would just be on the forefront of our mind. So that's it.
Any
Let me
questions?
put back up the. And if you want, data on any of these potential options, both efficacy, I know that instructional committee has had presentations, and but if it would be helpful in kind of thinking through some of the options, just let us know.
Thank you.
I think too, that this will impact your budget process as you go forward, so be thinking about this as it relates to even the first night, I think, is February 8th, Jack. And the first night is all around, positions and, the chunk of positions and
Yep.
benefits, which it's huge. I mean, that's what, 80% of your budget, 80? Close?
A couple years it was 78 point something,
78.
but
All
yeah.
right, yeah.
Depends on
Yeah,
where
it
it is.
depends.
I mean, that's-
Depends, but-
It's higher for grants as well too,
Yeah.
Yeah.
about 83%.
So this is gonna be important as you make decisions, and we will make recommendations to you.
I have a non-related topic. How much do we depend on the federal government for managing our cash flow on our grants?
Well, we don't because it goes through the state, so we submit every month,
Okay,
no problem.
so if there is a lengthy federal shutdown, are we assume that you're not getting
Oh,
your
wait,
money
what is-
from the
I
federal
guess I better get that
government?
3 million for the broken ground, huh?
I know. Gotta know.
Because all of it runs through the department,
Yeah,
we make all of our requests monthly
Yeah.
through them, all approved by Jack and myself before they go. And so I don't imagine that's gonna impact us, but.
Well, if the
as
state is
the
not
It is a
covering-
re-
They are not receiving their funding, then it could have an impact.
so we'd have to know what funding they have.
Yeah.
They
have
the
over there.
state is also on a reimbursement
Schedule.
system as well.
We'll have a
So
call pretty quickly here with the department over all the grants.
I think it would be wise to have a
Is that
plan.
tomorrow night?
Not until, probably not
Couple
this
days?
summer.
Oh, summer?
Contingency.
But
It's
it
not
would
a
be good to
drop
have
dead
a
till
plan
the summer,
to
right.
cash,
Because I
manage
saw
cash
Janet
flow.
Yellen was talking about it's coming quicker than they had planned. And I thought I
Extra-
saw January
ex-
19th.
That's when they start doing extraordinary measures
Oh,
to stretch it out.
no. The only one I would be honest with you that I'd be concerned about would be the HVAC
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Because I've structured that deal with a significant prepay discount. And I'm submitting and getting reimbursed for it. But it's very a long process because of the supply chain right now. So,
I will work.
Other
I
than
just
that,
think it
cash
would be
flow's
good
fine.
for us to have a contingency plan for whatever we need to have contingency plans for.
During the last shutdown, I got a call from, when I was over at the Seacoast, I got a call from a mom whose husband was in the Coast Guard and they weren't getting paid.
Yes, yes.
And so issues around food
Yep.
and other necessities became really critical for her. And so obviously we made calls and took care of it, but, it didn't, you don't think about that, that you're.
I actually think they have fixed the Coast Guard issue for the future, but
Did they?
there
Okay.
is a lot of federal employees who won't get paid if there's a
I-
shutdown or who don't
I
get
know it
paid
was an
during
issue for the
a
Coast
shutdown.
Guard. I'm glad to hear that.
I mean, you have the food service fund, and that's, not anywhere from 90 to 120,000 a month, but our biggest payroll is June. That's where the cash flow is important, but from now till then, we're fine. You have strong reserves. If we had to, I'd have a conversation with Scott. Warren and I would come up with a plan to be able to say, okay, I'm gonna tell the board, we're gonna pull from that cash flow to hold until we can get reimbursed if we needed it. I mean, you have 18 million sitting in the trust, so we'll be fine, but it's a good point to bring it up.
Anyone else have anything else? Take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
I like to end these meetings on a high note.
Of course.
Yeah. Well.